Hi, in this clip analysis, we'll explore the uses of aspect ratio, lenses, and depth of field. And we'll be doing this using a scene from Andrea Arnold's 2011 film, Wuthering Heights. The novel is a very complex story of love and revenge, but for the purposes of this particular clip analysis, I'll just give you a brief summary of the part of the story that you'll be seeing here. Mr. Earnshaw, a Yorkshire farmer and owner of Wuthering Heights, brings home an orphan from Liverpool. He names the boy Heathcliff and raises him with his two children, Hindley and Catherine.
I found him in the street. No, he had no one. So I thought, what? It was the Christian thing to do.
Catherine and Heathcliff share a very close bond, but Hindley is jealous of Heathcliff and hates him because he feels that Heathcliff has taken his place not only in Mr. Earnshaw's affections, but as the son and heir of Wuthering Heights. What we'll see in this scene is the start of these two relationships, the beginning of Heathcliff and Catherine's very strong love and friendship, and the first time we start to see Hindley acting on his feelings of rage, jealousy, and frustration. As you're watching the scene, think about aspect ratio, lenses, and depth of field. For aspect ratio, which one has Andrea Arnold chosen? Why might she have chosen it, and what is it doing? For lenses, how are we seeing what we're seeing? Is it the expansive wide-angle view, the familiar medium lens view, an observational telephoto view, or a shifting zoom lens view? And for depth of field, what is the focus of our attention? Is it context or characters? And what does the focus tell us about the characters? See you on the other side.
Are you hurt? Can you understand me? Come. Come on.
This is a great place to stop the video for class discussion or individual responses. Then I'll share with you what I'm seeing. I love this opening shot, which gives us a clear sense of the aspect ratio and is also a meaningful use of a wide-angle lens. First, a word about aspect ratio. It might seem an odd choice for Andrea Arnold to choose the Academy ratio for her aspect ratio, since that ratio limits the frame, which we can see in this wide open, vast expanse, deep space, deep focus shot. And for those of you who know the story of Wuthering Heights or picked it up from the scene that you just saw, you know that the moors play a very important symbolic role in Heathcliff and Catherine's relationship. The expansiveness of the moor seemed to signal the vastness and the possibility of Heathcliff and Catherine's relationship, of their love for one another. It's also a place where they can be wild and free of the social and cultural oppressions and repressions that seem to limit their lives. But they can't live on the moors, they have to live in society, and society's conventions and expectations eventually part them. Catherine and Heathcliff both eventually find success in social terms, but they always and forever wish that they could still be together, alone, and on the moors, free again. Their relationship, like the moors, expresses an inherent tension, and that's why I love this opening shot, which also expresses an inherent tension between the more limited aspect ratio and the vastness of the view within that aspect ratio. It also clearly establishes the context for what we're about to see, and also the context for our two main characters, which is why I made a point of going into so much detail about the moors and how they symbolize Catherine and Heathcliff's relationship. You might also remember in my discussion of Kelly Reichardt's choice to use the Academy ratio in her film Meek's Cutoff, that her use of the Academy ratio sets up a wonderful tension between macrocosm and microcosm. We see this here too. The macrocosmic forces shape the characters and influence their decisions, but the microcosm, the worlds within individuals and within individual relationships, are just as, if not more important than what's happening in the universe that surrounds them. And as you probably noticed in the clip, and this is something I'll be going into quite a bit of detail about, this is a very individualistic and a very sensory-oriented film. So the microcosm not only of the individual, but the individual's sense perceptions are really paramount in this film. And cinematography is an incredibly important way of bringing that to our attention, allowing us to experience what the characters, and specifically Heathcliff, are experiencing. Here we move from one context, the moors, to another context, Wuthering Heights. This shift is important since Wuthering Heights is the nexus for all of the relationships that we're going to see play out, not only in the scene, but also in the film. And though Wuthering Heights looms large because of this, in fact, it's the title of the book and of the film, when you see it in this particular shot, it seems small. On one hand, it seems dwarfed by its surroundings, but on another, it seems to be a part of them, as if it had risen out of the moors. We follow up here with another deep space, deep focus shot, but there's also a selective focus element. The selective focus element is really important, and honestly, this is such a strategic shot. At this point in the film, Heathcliff and Cathy are connected by space. They inhabit the same house, but they're not connected emotionally. Their deep relationship hasn't started. So the deep space, deep focus aspect of the shot is an important way to communicate their distance from one another. But by having both characters inhabit the same shot, it signals or suggests the possibility for that connectedness, for that twosome which is to come. Heathcliff looms large in the foreground, and the camera sort of dances with him. It moves one way, he moves another, and back and forth, but both he and the camera are looking at Cathy in the far distance. This is a wonderful way to align the camera/viewer with Heathcliff. We are both looking at the same thing and from about the same distance, so we can presume that we're seeing what Heathcliff is seeing, and what we're seeing is Cathy, but we can't quite see her face. We don't really know what she's feeling or what she might be thinking because we can't see her expression, but we can see that she's sitting very still on that wall and seems to be focused just as pointedly on Heathcliff as Heathcliff is focused on her. We can certainly read this shot as a selective focus shot, wherein the selective focus privileges one character over another, usually because that character is the focus of our attention, because they're saying something or they're doing something that we need to focus on. Though those rules don't really seem to apply here because Kathy isn't really doing anything. But she is the focus of Heathcliff's attention, and the camera being very closely aligned with Heathcliff is also making her the focus of its/our attention. The selective focus includes Heathcliff to be sure that we always remember who is the source of the gaze, who is the source of the focus. And if we follow the maxim that the blurrier the character, the more unsure or uncertain or unstable they are, then we can think about Heathcliff's emotional state or his mental state and think, perhaps he's blurry because he doesn't know what Kathy is thinking or feeling. He can see that she's clearly looking at him and quite attentively, but he's not sure why. In fact, if this were a horror movie, her fixed gaze would be honestly a little creepy. We cut to Heathcliff in what appears to be a medium lens shot, then back to the selective focus shot, but this time the two of them seem closer together. Now we move into one of my favorite shots. I love the way the focus racks here. Rack focus can be used to focus our attention from one character to another, or like in our The Graduate example, it can be used to indicate uncertainty or that kind of pre-dawning consciousness where you're not quite sure what someone is saying and then you are sure and come back into focus. But here the rack focus seems to signify a kind of willing release of consciousness. Every time I see this shot, I think about going out into sunshine that's just the right temperature, just the right warmth, and you look up into the sky and you just release yourself into that warmth, lose yourself into it, you just melt into it. And the rack focus does a wonderful job visualizing that for us. I mean, clearly we can't be actually experiencing what Heathcliff is experiencing, but by seeing him in this particular blurry context, it's as if we could imaginatively put ourselves into his experience, that we could, in a way, if not feel what he's feeling, imagine what he's feeling because we see visual information that cues us to have a similar experience. So this particular moment cues a sort of sensory empathy, but it's also strategic for another reason, which is it sets up the moment, the surprising moment that's going to come in just a second. Because even if you're not quite feeling what Heathcliff is feeling, you can clearly see, or fuzzily see, that his defenses are down. The blurriness here isn't necessarily indicating uncertainty, but it is indicating a kind of consciousnesslessness, which is an absolutely ridiculous word, but one that means essentially that Heathcliff is just, he's in the moment, he's in the feeling, he's not paying attention to anything. In fact, I can almost imagine him with his eyes shut as his head is raised upwards, basking in the light and the warmth of the sun. So he's not paying attention to anything but the feeling, or at least I imagine he's not paying attention to anything but the feeling. And then we see him, probably in a medium lens shot, doing exactly what I had described, what I'd felt. He had indeed been looking up towards the sun, enjoying its warmth, and now he's kind of coming out of that reverie, blinking his eyes as he comes back into consciousness and tries to readjust his vision. Then out of nowhere comes a force. We have no idea at this moment, just like Heathcliff has no idea what this force is, but it's clearly a violent force. The next thing we clearly see is Heathcliff thrown against the building, then doubled over in pain. Then this great rack focus shot as Heathcliff turns to look at the source of the violence and sees it's Hindley. Then we rack back to focus on Heathcliff and his newfound clarity. He now knows Hindley is definitely out to get him. Then we have what seems to be a first-person POV shot, again probably using a medium lens. And what I mean by first-person POV shot is a shot that seems to replicate the visual field of the character. We see Heathcliff doubled over looking down at the ground, and now we have a shot of the ground. POV shots are a quick and easy way to put us into the mind and the perspective, the point of view of the character. But this is not a POV shot. Once again, the camera / we are standing very close to Heathcliff, seeing what he's seeing, experiencing what he's experiencing, but beside him, not as him. Now, I can't speak to Andrea Arnold's intention because I don't know what she was thinking when she was designing this shot with her director of photography, nor have I read anything about the thinking behind this particular kind of technique, but it is an unusual technique. And what it makes me think is that such a choice respects the agency of the character and of the viewer. We are both equally allowed to inhabit our own perspectives, but this very closely joined, very closely connected relationship created by this particular kind of camera position is a way of promoting the empathy that I was talking about, the kind of sensory empathy, the experiential empathy, and by doing so, in a way, replicates the kind of deep connection that is a part of the narrative, is Heathcliff and Cathy's connection. So just as one could imagine Heathcliff and Cathy are connected with one another, so too are we connected with our narrator, Heathcliff, experiencing what he's experiencing, feeling what he's feeling. And in this way, we can imagine what he's feeling as it relates to his relationship with Cathy. Here, Cathy bridges the distance that we had earlier seen between them and enters the frame. And her first words to Heathcliff are ones of concern. Then we get this wonderful tilt up, which I'll talk more about in cinematography too. Then we see Heathcliff not really responding to Cathy, and it's important to note here that he's alone in the frame. The corresponding shot we'll see of Cathy in just a second is what we call an over-the-shoulder shot, and it's quite commonly used for conversations. But having Heathcliff alone in his shot seems to suggest that he's feeling alone at this moment. Here we see the over-the-shoulder shot that I mentioned, and in this shot we can see that the two of them are clearly connected. Or perhaps I should say that Cathy is clearly trying to connect with Heathcliff. And here she beckons him, inviting him to follow her. Heathcliff hesitates, looking back out towards the moors, perhaps as to see if Hindley's still out there. Perhaps it's because he's thinking about whether he should follow her or not. But he does, and in the darkened interior of the barn, he sees that she's putting a bridle on her horse. The shot is so beautifully lit. The way the light comes through and gives this sort of golden halo to Cathy's hair and to the horse's hair as well. And here we have the first of several what I'm calling sensory detail shots, where we have close-ups on particular aspects of an activity. Many of these close-ups also involve hands, and so this kind of attention to detail with the hand of one of the characters involved in the activity, it promotes a sense of touch. There's actually a word for this. It's haptic, H-A-P-T-I-C. I think it's originally a Greek word, but to make a long definition short, haptic is when you try to replicate the experience of touch in a medium. Here, seeing Cathy's hand touching the horse's forelock makes me imagine touching a horse's forelock. And if I'm remembering correctly, if we see someone doing something, it fires that part of our brain that's also involved in the activity that they're doing. So there is a connection between seeing someone touching something and us in our brains actually imagining doing that same activity. We soon return to see Heathcliff watching Cathy at her work, and it seems like the quiet of the stable and the calmness of the horse soothes Heathcliff. Two beautiful medium lens shots here, and then we see the two of them horseback riding off into the moors. Another deep space, deep focus shot, but this one includes Cathy and Heathcliff, putting them within this context, and the calmness and the soothing quality of the shot makes them seem very much at home here. Then we move to a series of closer shots. They're not close-ups per se, but they're much closer to Kathy and Heathcliff than we just were. These closer-in shots emphasize Kathy and Heathcliff's closeness. There's a kind of physical intimacy that's established here. In this POV shot, which is a POV shot, I can just imagine what Kathy's hair would feel like, would smell like as it blows into my face. And here we see Heathcliff move just ever so slightly closer to her. Then his hand touching the warm, undulating side of the horse, which I can just imagine what that feels like. And here's another beautiful close-up, not so much haptic, but it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful detail. I also love the way Andrea Arnold shifts back and forth seamlessly between these deep space, deep focus shots and the closer in detail shots. This seems strategic to me too. Remember how I was talking about the close-up shots on horseback and how they promote a sense of physical intimacy? It seems like when you go from the close-up shots of this closeness and you move out to the wider deep focus, deep space shots, that seems to indicate or to suggest that the same kind of physical intimacy, this connectedness, this feeling at home is not just between these two characters, but also exists between the two characters and this particular more context. And this closer-up shot of Heathcliff as he makes his way over the rocks and through the bushes to follow Kathy has not only that haptic quality that I was talking about, I can almost feel what those rocks feel like and what the bushes feel like, but it also shows that even though this is very kind of desolate, rocky, difficult terrain, he's making his way quite easily over it, and he does so to follow Kathy to this beautiful perch up in the sky. And now he is the one to come closer, and then the two of them are anointed by this beautiful sunlight. At first, each of them inhabit their own frames and in slightly shallower focus. Right here you can see the focus is quite shallow on Heathcliff. The moors are not his focus, Kathy is, and now we see him move closer to her, and the two of them at last inhabit the same frame. Then we have this beautiful shot with them as they look off into the distance. And then this deep space, deep focus shot where they're at more of a distance, and that distance allows us to see how at home, how at one they are with this wild and beautiful world. And also how comfortable they seem with one another and with sharing this world together.